What's up, everybody? It is Dan Cam, and I am back with another video. And what I'm going to be doing today is walking you through on how I replaced my HP Omen motherboard with an X570 Aorus Elite. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into it. Alright, so before we get into the motherboard swap, there's a few things I want to go over. And the first one is I unfortunately will not have a tutorial on how to swap in a new motherboard into the Omen case. Because if you've been following my channel, you know that I just posted a video on swapping out the power supply in the case. And then I swapped all of the components in the Omen case into a Fractal Meshify Compact 2 case. Because I knew I was going to end up swapping cases, and the HP Omen only accepts a micro ATX, but I wanted to go with a full ATX board for full flexibility. So I swapped all the components into the new case, and then now I'll be motherboard swapping to a full ATX board. So unfortunately, I won't be showing you guys how to do it into the Omen case, but everything for this walkthrough and tutorial is pretty much identical to what you would do for the HP Omen case. The only difference is the max size board you can fit in the Omen is going to be a micro ATX. So the second thing that I want to go over is that the motherboard that I'm using may completely differ from the board that you're using. Things like the 24-pin connector and the CPU connector are usually pretty universal between motherboard manufacturers, but things like fan headers and RGB headers are completely different. So just make sure you go through your user's manual and you fully understand where each of the connections are supposed to go. And one thing I don't touch on as much as I would have liked in the video is exactly where all of the connections go for the motherboard, like your front panel connectors. But if you watched my case swap video, I went over it in much more detail. So if you're curious about where anything's supposed to be connected, I would highly recommend checking out that video, and I'll go ahead and I'll link that above. And the last thing that I want to go over is that there's going to be a few items that you are going to need in order to swap over to a new motherboard. So rather than just telling you guys in the video what you'll need, I'm going to go ahead and list out everything down in the description. So if you're planning on swapping out your motherboard, please check out the description as I have a ton of good information down there. And if you aren't already, please consider following me on Instagram. My handle is Dan_Cam_U_no. But without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into the motherboard swap. All right, so let's go over everything that you're going to need. And obviously you're going to need your new motherboard, but I would highly recommend keeping the box nearby because there may be some screws that you might need. And I also like to assemble my new motherboard on the box that it came in. Then I would highly recommend getting comfortable with your motherboard by going through the user's manual at least once and keeping it nearby for your build so you can see all of the different fan headers and RGB connections and anything else that you might need. So I would keep this nearby, and then I would also keep your user's guide for your PC case nearby just in case you need to see different AIO configurations or fan setups or information on how to mount different size boards to the case. And then I would also recommend having the instruction manual for your CPU cooler nearby because I have an AMD processor. So I'm going to need the AM4 socket bracketry to secure it to the board. And that's how my setup's going to be, but yours may be different. So make sure you have this information nearby. And then here is going to be everything that you need to secure the CPU cooler to the board. I have the two brackets, I have my spacers, and then I also have the screws, to secure it to the board. And then you're also going to need some thermal paste. I always end up using some Noctua paste that actually came with my Noctua cooler. So I'll be using this. And this is optional, but I'm going to be using a thermal paste spreader. And I'll link where I got these. I think it was a 3-pack for like $7 or $8. So I'll link these. So I'll be using a thermal paste spreader to spread around all the paste on the CPU. And then you may need a longer screwdriver, but obviously you're going to need a Phillips head, either number 1 or number 2 screwdriver for all the motherboard screws. And then depending on what you're doing, if you're swapping cases at the same time, you may need a number 1 as well. And then you're also going to need some isopropyl alcohol to clean the CPU once you swap it from your other board, if that's what you're going to be doing. And then I have some lint-free paper towels that I spray the alcohol on and clean the CPU up, and then also wipe dry and clean. And then I'm going to be using 2 flash drives, and then this one has my Windows creation tool on it. So this is how I'm going to install Windows onto my new motherboard. And I have this linked below like I was talking about earlier. And then I also have another USB stick that has all of my updates for the board, including the BIOS update, the LAN update for Ethernet, and then basically all other updates I'll need to do as soon as the board is live and ready to go. Then other than that, I think that about does it for everything that you're going to need. And with the motherboard swap, I'll also be changing a few other components. I'm going to be going with a 1 terabyte NVMe drive. While my HP Omen did come with a 512, I'm going to go ahead and upgrade the boot drive to a WD Black 1 terabyte. And then I'll also be getting rid of my mechanical drive, the 1 terabyte, for a 2 terabyte WD Blue SSD. And then I'll also be swapping out the RAM. While my HP Omen did come with, I changed it to 32 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz. I'll be going with 32 gigabytes of 3600 megahertz. And this should work really well with my AMD 3700X processor. Then I also ordered some Antec cable extension sleeve cables. So instead of the stock power supply cables that came with it, these are actually extensions that plug into it, and they look really nice. And once the PC's all set up, it'll look super clean. And I've got these cable combs that go with it, so the cables will look nice and uniform. So yeah, just a few other things I wanted to note down before getting into the tutorial. All right, so I'm going to start off by removing all of the panels on the Fractal case, including both sides, the top and the front. Then I also had a little cool metal Mario figurine that I took out and placed to the side. And then I also removed the top bracket, which holds both of the 140 millimeter exhaust fans that I have. And it just gives you quite a bit of access to the top of the motherboard and makes it easier to build. So now I'm going to go ahead and go through and separate all of the connections for the motherboard. Then here I am having a bit of an issue getting the CPU power cable out of there. And then I get the PCIe cable from my graphics card. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove the graphics card. And then get that out of there. And I had a little bit of trouble getting it removed. I was getting caught on something and I wasn't sure what, but I get it out of there. And there's the 24 pin. And I'll push all cables through towards the back. Then here I am kind of just undoing all of my cable management that I did. And what I'm going to end up doing here is stuffing all of the cables inside because I'm going to be laying the PC on its back. And I really don't want to pinch any of those cables while it's on its back. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove each of the screws that hold in the motherboard. And then once I get all of these screws out, I can go ahead and separate the motherboard from the Fractal case. So there is the last screw. And I go ahead and place a paper towel down in preparation for removal and then gently pull it out. And you can see just how huge this Aorus Elite board is. I did a lot of research on this board and it seemed like it was the best value X570 board out there. And you can see just how much it dwarfs the the MICRO ATX Omen motherboard. And I think the new board looks fantastic with all the black and silver. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove the CPU cooler fans, and this gives me access to the 2 screws that secure the CPU cooler to the CPU cooler bracket. So I get those uniformly unscrewed, and I remove the cooler, and you can see a little bit of paste on the cooler that I'm going to have to clean up. And then now I'm going to go ahead and remove all of the CPU cooler bracket accessories on the Omen motherboard. And these ones are not going to be used on my new board because Omen motherboards use Intel spacing, and now I'm going to have to use AMD AM4 spacing. So now I go ahead and get all of the thermal paste off of the CPU, and I use a Q-tip here to get all of the edges and make sure it's super clean. And then once again, I use isopropyl alcohol and a lint-free paper towel to get it nice and shiny. And then now I've got the CPU completely cleaned, and you can totally see the Ryzen logo, and there's no thermal paste left on there. I'm going to go ahead and undo the bracket that secures the CPU to the socket, and you can hear the click. And then what I'm going to do now with my new board is I'm going to remove these 2 brackets from it because I'm not going to be using them. And then you'll see on the top left right here, you're going to see a little silver arrow. And that's how the orientation for the CPU is going to be when I install it on the new motherboard. And you can see this little gold arrow on the top left of the processor. That's going to align with that silver arrow. So you definitely want to make sure you install your processor the correct way. So here I am removing both of the brackets on my new motherboard and getting those out of there. And I go ahead and lift up the lever and get this socket ready for the new CPU. And then I carefully grab the edges of the CPU, making sure not to touch the gold pins on the bottom, and then gently lay it into place. And then with a little wiggle, you'll get it to sit nice and flush. And you can hear the satisfying little clunk sound it makes when it sits in place. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull the lever down and latch it into place. And the CPU is ready to go. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my new CPU cooler accessories going. Because, like I said earlier, Omens use Intel spacing for AMD and Intel. And then this board is obviously an AM4 because it is Ryzen, so it uses a completely different set of accessories. So I use the gray spacers with the AM4 brackets and the 4 screws that secure it to the board and get those tightened down. And then now I'm going to move on to installing the RAM and getting the DIMM slots prepared to install the RAM. And then just make sure your orientation is correct on the RAM and go ahead and get those installed. So now I've got all 4 of those installed. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the SSD. And here's the heatsink that comes with the board. And then based off which SSD you get, you're going to go ahead and use the standoff screw and the small screw to secure the SSD to the board. And there is my new WD black M.2 NVMe that I'm going to use. So let's go ahead and let's get this standoff screw installed. And I'm going to use the slot that's labeled 80. So I get that nice and tight. Now I'm going to grab my SSD and install it into the connector on the board. And it just clicks in. Then I'm going to grab the small screw and secure the SSD to the board. And then I'm going to remove the film on the heatsink. Make sure you remove this before applying the heatsink because this is what keeps the SSD cool. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down. And then now it's time to move on to the thermal paste. And I'm going to go ahead and use my thermal paste spreader to evenly distribute all the thermal paste on the CPU, making sure there's no uncovered spots and There's no spots that have, like a chunk of thermal paste. And just getting a nice and clean distribution for some good heat transfer. And then now I'm going to go ahead and install the CPU cooler. And then by uniformly tightening down each side, I'm going to secure it to the cooler bracket. Usually the threads are pretty long, so it may take a little while to screw in, but you'll eventually get there. And you want those to be pretty tight, so your cooler is nice and sturdy. And then now it's time to install the fans on the cooler, and you'll have to excuse my big head there getting in the way. So my cooler came with these two little clips, but it only came with one fan, so I actually purchased the second fan, and then I'm going to use these clips to secure it to the cooler. So now I got those installed. Now it's time to move on to the back of the case, and I'm going to kind of separate all of my front panel connectors and the PSU connectors, and then I'm also going to remove my mechanical hard drive because I'm going to be no longer using a 3.5-inch HDD. So now, once again, I'm going to go ahead and tuck in all these cables so I don't pinch them, because I'm going to go ahead and lay the PC on its back once again, and we're going to go ahead and install my new motherboard. And just in case you didn't see my case swap video, depending on what size board you're going to use, you're going to need to make sure that you have the right standoff screws for what size board you have. So you can see these are all labeled A, M, or I. And you can see these ones right here are labeled M. So I would use these if I was using a micro ATX board. But I am using a standard ATX board. So I'm going to move those standoff screws to these bottom threads that have the A on them. And then the ones towards the top don't need to be moved because those are for ATX, micro ATX, or mini. So I'll just leave those alone. And I removed the IO shield from my HP Omen motherboard. And my Aorus Elite actually came with a built-in IO shield, so I do not need to install it. It's already pre-installed on the board. And then my case has a little dowel pin, which helps you align the motherboard to the case. And then you can always tell your motherboard is aligned by the threads on the standoff screws align with the holes on the motherboard. So I'm going to go ahead and get the motherboard nice and tight. And then now I'm going to go ahead and install my 2.5-inch SSD, which I'll be using instead of the 3.5-inch mechanical. And I plan to use this for all of my YouTube video clips. So I should have faster loading times when editing instead of using the mechanical drive. And now I'm just securing it to the bracket that comes with my Fractal Mesh Phi Compact 2. And I secure that with the one thumb screw. And then this was kind of a pain in the butt, excuse me. But like I was talking about earlier, I ended up going with these Antec PSU extensions. And while they look absolutely fantastic, they were kind of a pain because A, they are a little bit longer than I would have liked. I don't feel they really should have been this long. And it made cable managing kind of a pain in the butt. And B, they are very stiff, which is awesome because once you get them fully aligned and in place, they look fantastic. But man, getting them to sit nicely was not easy. And then getting the little cable cones installed on these sleeves was also not easy as well. And then here I am finally getting everything all cable managed. And it ended up coming out okay. I'm satisfied with it. And as long as the computer's functional, that's the main issue.
But these cable extension sleeves were definitely a pain in the butt to deal with, and it took a lot longer than it seems like it did in the video. But they ended up looking absolutely fantastic, as you'll see in the beauty shots later on in the video. And then now I'm just hooking up the SATA data and power cable and getting the last of my cables situated. And then one issue I ran into is that my CPU cooler fans are originally Y-split into that fan header in the top right, but I ended up Y-splitting them to this fan header down here because it looked much cleaner and the wires were nice and hidden. And another issue I ran into was that the CPU PSU cable was interfering with the top mount bracket, which houses my two 140mm exhaust fans. So just be wary if you're using this case that you may have a little trouble with interference from that cable and your top mount fans. But I ended up getting it to work, and we're almost ready to start installing all of the connectors. So now I'm going to start installing all the front panel connectors, including the USB Type-C and the USB 3.0. And these are all the ones that are attached to the case. And then in the next slide, I'm going to show you how I have these all positioned. But I get these all installed and cable managed the best I can. And just remember that your motherboard may be different, so go through your user's manual to make sure you have all your connections in the right spot. All right, so here is how all of the connections go for the front panel. There's your HD audio port. There is your USB 3.0. Then here is your front panel connectors, and I'll leave a diagram for how I hook mine up, but yours may be different. And then my front panel also has a USB Type-C, which is awesome because I use the USB Type-C cable for my iPhone, which I use for recording all of my YouTube clips. All right, guys, so I didn't film much of the end process, but I went ahead and put the GPU in, and then I kind of managed some cables down here, but it looks like that I am all done, guys. All cables are hooked up. All fans are in their right spot. Cable management's not bad, and the cable extensions look pretty good. It'd be nice if I can pair these together. I'll have to see if there's a 7-pin bridge that I can put in here, these little bridge guys right here. But overall, I think it looks fantastic. It came out great. Even my 5700 goes really well with the color scheme of, the color scheme of black and gray. So I'm gonna go ahead and hook up all my connections, and then it's time to install Windows. All right, guys, so we're about to turn it on, and I went ahead and turned the power supply on. You can actually see my light strip that's hooked up to the back of the motherboard is working properly, so at least I'm getting power to the board. So the moment of truth, let's go ahead and press the power button and hope for the best. So all my fans are working, and they're all running a little bit fast, but I'm gonna go ahead and configure that up, and it came down. And then I do have my Windows USB install stick installed. So let's go ahead and see what happens. Right now I'm not getting anything. Oh, there we go. That's my main monitor, so that came up, so that's fantastic. There we go, Windows setup. We are in. Let's see if. So, all right, go ahead and click next, and then let's go ahead and install. All right, so I'm gonna pause the video and put the key because I went ahead and bought a new copy of Windows Pro. So let's put that in and continue. So I went ahead and entered my Windows product key,
and then it brought me to this screen, and it's asking me which drive do I want to install Windows on. And I've got a 2 terabyte SATA SSD that's showing up, and then I also have my M.2 NVMe. So I want my boot drive to be on the NVMe, so I'm going to go ahead and click this one, and we're going to click next. And then now it's going through and installing Windows. Alright, so I went through a few settings, and then other than that, it is now ready to go, and it's doing all its updates, and then I'll greet you guys as soon as I get to the desktop. Alright guys, so we are at the desktop, and right now it's just doing some updates. I've got some USB sticks in there, like my mouse and keyboard, so it's just setting those up. And you can see it's kind of letting me know what's going on right here. And no, I do not want to make Edge my my default browser, even though Microsoft Edge isn't bad. But I'm going to go ahead and restart my computer, and then I'm going to start with doing the updates that I put on the red USB stick for the BIOS and everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so I got all of the files copied over to the computer in my downloads file, and then what I did was I extracted each one of them, and all you do to do that is right click it and then click extract all, and then I just extracted it into my downloads folder. So I'm going to go through each of these and go through the setup and install all of them. And once you go into each one, you'll notice that it's going to be an application that you're going to want to open. So that one's an application. Then we go into this one, another application. So you'll see some that have multiple files. So there's an exe file. Then this one, I'm going to want to do this application. This is just a text document. And then, so I'm going to want to do this one. And then let's go into the next one. And then in here, I'm going to want to go ahead and do this installation right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do all these, and then I will be right back. Alright, so all the drivers are installed. Now I want to head into the BIOS to make a few adjustments. And the way I'm going to do it with my motherboard is, as soon as I restart it and I see the Aorus logo, I'm going to go ahead and press the delete key on my keyboard. And I'm just going to keep pressing it until I go into the BIOS. So let's go to power. Let's go to restart. And then let's wait for it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and start clicking it. Alright, so we are now in the BIOS, and the first thing that we can see is my 4 sticks of RAM are actually running at 2600 megahertz, and they are rated at 3600, so we're going to go ahead and change that, because you can see it says XMP disabled. So for my motherboard, I'm going to go ahead and click Advanced Mode, and then under the tweaker setting, you'll see extreme memory profile is disabled. So all we're going to do is double click it. Then we're going to see profile 1. We're going to go ahead and click that and click enter. And you can see right here it says 3600. And then other than that, in the BIOS, you can go ahead and go through it and see if there's anything you want to change. It's also, let me go back to easy mode so it's a little bit easier to see. So click easy mode. Another good thing to take a look at is your smart fan. You should have an application in your BIOS to set up all of your fans and what kind of curve you want them to be on. So that is really worth taking a look at as well. But the main thing I wanted to do was change my RAM to 3600 and allow the XMP profile. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and save and exit, and then let's go back to the desktop for one more thing. So now that we've got our XMP profile enabled, let's just go to Task Manager and make sure it's actually running at its appropriate speed. So right click on the start, and then we're going to go ahead and click Task Manager. And then if we head up to the Performance tab, we can click on Memory, which it's already on, and you can see I've got 32 gigabytes of RAM, and then it's running at 3600 megahertz, so that's fantastic. So let's go ahead and exit out of this. And the last thing we're going to want to do is set up our SSD. So let's go ahead and go into Disk Management. And then once we're in disk management, you can see you must initialize a disk before Logical Disk Manager can access it. So let's go ahead and click on OK. Then you can see my disk 1, this is where my boot drive is. So you can see it's called C, and then you can see how this is blacked out right here. So this means the drive has not been set up yet. So all we're going to do is right click it, and we're going to do New Simple Volume. And then it's going to walk you through the steps. And I would just leave all of this how it is. And then assign the following letter drive. So let's go ahead and we can go ahead and use E. So let's use it as E. And then let's go ahead and click Next. And then volume label, we can just leave it as new volume. And then let's go ahead and click Next. And then let's go ahead and finish. And then now it's reformatting, and we now have both drives up and ready to go. And then other than installing all of the things that I use for my computer, we are all done with the setup and everything is good to go. And actually, one thing I almost forgot that it's absolutely necessary to do is we're going to head down here into our settings, and then we're going to go up to System and Display. Then in here, you want to set up how your monitors, how they are oriented. I always use my right one as my gaming one. So it's my primary, and then this is my secondary. And then the important thing is to head into Advanced Display Settings. Then you can see both monitors are actually running at 60 Hertz. So I want to go ahead and change that. So let's click this, click 144, and now it's going to load. Do I want to keep these settings? Yes, I do. So let's go ahead and click the second monitor, and the second monitor actually changed too. So I think we are good to go. 144 Hertz, and then 144 Hertz. So, all right, now that is the final step, and we should be good to go now. All right, guys, so the motherboard swap is complete and everything is working great. I've got all my drivers installed. I used a new SSD for the M.2 NVMe, the boot drive, and the 2.5-inch SATA drive. So I unfortunately had to reinstall all of the programs that I use, which I actually don't use too many, and I try not to clog up my system too much. I'm very minimal on the programs that I use. I only download exactly what I need. So I went through all that, got all that downloaded, which was kind of a pain, but everything's installed. And I also had to re-download a few games that I consistently play. So that was a little bit annoying, but it's a fresh copy of Windows, so it's nice to actually start over because I had kind of a lot of clutter on my old machine. But I'm really happy with the results. The Aorus BIOS is really easy to navigate. And then I also downloaded some of their programs, which actually greatly help with making sure you have the newest version of the chipset drivers and the BIOS and pretty much anything else related to the motherboard. It also came with some cool programs. So normally you have to go into your BIOS to set the fan curve, but I found a program that Aorus makes where you can set completely custom fan curves. So I've got it absolutely dialed right now. I think up to like 55 degrees. It stays at about 20% fan speed, and then as it gets a little bit warmer, it ramps up. So it's nice to be able to completely set my fan curve, and it's also really nice to run at 3600 megahertz for my RAM speed. The computer seems much quicker, especially since I got rid of the mechanical hard drive and I only have the SATA SSD and the NVMe M.2 SSD. The computer boots super quick. Editing is much faster now, especially all of my timeline stuff, like where I paste all of my video clips and edit them. It loads much quicker, and especially when I'm doing playbacks and stuff. So I'm really happy with the computer. It came out looking really good. The cable extensions were kind of a pain to cable manage, and then I showed you the pictures. It came out looking really good. I'm actually really happy with it, but man, those things were extremely stiff, and it was hard to get them to bend into place. But with a good amount of working in, I was able to get them just how I like them. So overall, I'm super happy with the build. And then now just comes trying to find a 3080 or 3080 Ti. I think that's probably the last upgrade I'm going to make for a while. And then once I do that, I'll have this RX 5700 graphics card, which I want to put back in the Omen. And then I'll actually only need to find a CPU, and I can completely revive the Omen. So I'm really looking forward to that, because I would like to give it to my girlfriend so she can use for work stuff, and she loves playing The Sims. So definitely planning on reviving the Omen soon, and I think it will make for some really good content that you guys will enjoy seeing. But yeah, other than that, the build came out great, and I'm really happy with the results. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and if you made it to the end, please give it a like rating, and please consider subscribing if you are enjoying my content. And like I said earlier, I may revive the Omen at some point. If I do find a new GPU, I'll just need a processor, and I can probably find one for fairly cheap, so please keep an eye out for that. I'm not sure when that will come up, but hopefully pretty soon, because most of the people subscribed are here for Omen content. But I'm happy that all of you guys are sticking around through this, and I've got a lot of good content coming out in the future, and I'm just really excited and looking forward to it. But once again, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you all have a great day.